Thanks for coming on this final day. I understand that a lot of you have been here for the last couple of days, so we hope to do the other sessions equal justice. In many countries of Asia, I think, as you all know, decent and safe housing remains a distant dream for millions. This session at least, will look at how governments and its partner stakeholders try to break away from the conventional practice of providing houses without addressing the equally important considerations of the environment. Productivity, basic needs, social cohesion. Equally vital to consider are shifting needs of poor households, considering the requirements of aging, family size, livelihood options, among other basic needs. Now, the session offers an opportunity to demonstrate the value of sustainable housing solutions in addressing these needs, and the discussants here will be challenged to identify better solutions for poor households using their diverse experiences. Allow me now to introduce our panelists. Secretary Kishore Thapa, Ministry of Urban Development from Nepal. Secretary Mary Ann Lucille Sering, Vice Chair of the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. Mr. Richard Northcote, Head of Corporate Communications, Public Affairs and Sustainability of Bayer Material Science AG, Germany. And to my far right is Dr. Jaime Aristotle Ali, founder and managing director of the Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, Mutually Reinforcing Institutions, that's CARD MRI. And of course, there's Dr. David Zampini, head of CEMEX Global Center for Technology and Innovation from Switzerland. I think before we proceed with our discussion, I'd like to invite our panelists to issue a brief statement on the work that they do so that you get a better understanding of what they do and how that is relevant to the topic that we will be discussing. So maybe if I can start from right across the platform here. Let's start with Aristotle. I think we're happy to go with first names, right, everyone? Yeah, and you can call me Lian. Thanks. So over to you, Ari.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Alif. I work for the CARD MRI, Mutually Reinforcing Institution. We are a group of social enterprises devoted in microfinance, microinsurance, and other support system for alleviating poverty in this country. Today we have about 2.3 million families that we have an total of outreach. We have about 1,500 branches all over the country with a full staff of 8,000 command. And we're into microfinance housing primarily because most of our clients are landless rural workers. They don't have house to begin with. And today, many of our landless rural workers are now owning their own land and owning their own houses using our approach. We first give them, we don't give them housing loan at first instance. We give them first productive loans so that they can have an income generating project. After 2 to 3 cycles, then we give them the housing loan within which they start to start their core shelter, and then together with their improvement on their income, then they build good and better houses.
Okay, great. Let's move on to Dr. Zampini. David.
Yeah, good morning. I'm head of the CEMEX research group in Switzerland, which is CEMEX's Center for Technology and Innovation. And basically, besides doing research and development on various topics related to materials, construction materials, one of the focuses that we have is also construction systems and housing systems. And in fact, we have been dedicating a lot of time and work with a very multidisciplinary group of people who are not just consisting of researchers, but we have business analysts, market analysts, commercial analysts, as well as anthropologists working in the R&D team to not only studying the solutions that we need to provide better solutions that we need to provide for housing, but also studying human behavior and having a very human-centric design approach in order to understand better how to provide the needs in a more cost-effective, but also interesting way. So.
Great. Kishore.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kishore Thapa. I am the Secretary in the Ministry of Urban Development in the Government of Nepal. My ministry looks after water supply, sanitation, housing, urban development, and building construction. We have a national target of providing sanitation and water supply for the whole country by the year 2017. By this time, we have already crossed the Millennium Development Goal in water supply and sanitation, but our national target is quite ambitious. We are working very hard for that. I have experience of almost 25 years in this housing and urban development. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Lucille Sering. I'm from the Climate Change Commission, an institutional response actually created in 2009 after our country of the typhoon Ketsana and Ondoy in 2009. I'm also the Executive Director of the Secretariat of the Climate Change Commission, probably to save on cost. The main function of the Climate Change Commission is to address the cross-sectoral implication of climate change to our country. At the same time, we're also tasked not only to coordinate, but to monitor and evaluate programs of government. And one of the challenges actually we faced at the time is that even despite knowing that all the impacts of climate change, we've been told already as early in the 1990s, most of the programs of government don't have assessment of our vulnerabilities on climate change. The biggest challenge for us at the time, in 2009, is how do we actually have programs that are based on vulnerabilities when the basic need for doing programs such as this is really science-based. So this is the role of the Climate Change Commission, and that's it for now.
Thank you. Richard.
Good morning. I'm Richard Northcote, as you heard, from Biomaterial Science. Probably the easiest way for me to explain why I'm here. I joined Bayer about 4 years ago for one reason and one reason only, and that's the mission that accompanies the slogan, Science for a Better Life. Everybody in this room benefits from the kind of science that we deliver to the world at the moment, but there are an awful lot of people who don't. So about 4 years ago when I joined, we started a project about how could we use the technologies that we all benefit from to take down the social pyramid to benefit those who could most benefit from it. We have a number of projects working on low-cost cold storage solutions, low-cost solar dryers, agricultural waste boards, turning waste into building materials, and the final one, which is the real reason I'm here, is a low-cost housing solution, which we already have in place in Malaysia, and we're here in the Philippines about to open our model home today. So I have to run out of here at 10:30 to Malabon to open the new house.
Great. So anyway, I think we'll be done by 10. So thank you very much for that introduction. We've got basically a discussion going on, so we'll chat through some of the issues which are pertinent for the next 20 to 30 minutes, and after that we're going to have throw it open to the floor and have a Q&A session. So let's just kick off, because basically I think the topic for this session essentially, it says acting outside the box, sustainable housing solutions. That's the topic for discussion today. So I think let's just open off with this in terms of asking, what sustainable housing actually means. Just the definition of sustainable housing to start with, because I think a lot of people obviously they have different interpretations of what sustainability actually means. And typically, sustainable housing is often considered from a predominantly sort of green perspective. Right, whether it saves resources, it cuts down on greenhouse gases, etc. And I guess the question to kick off would be why sustainable housing hasn't cottoned on more than it actually has beyond the green perspective. Why hasn't it also been connected with poverty alleviation, some of the socio sort of cultural challenges and solutions that it should be answering? Can I start off with Lucille? We've all got a mic each, yes.
We're going now to the ladies first rule.
Absolutely, but I mean, you're also running the Climate Change Commission, so yes.
Yeah, I think we have to understand when we talk about housing solutions, we're talking about source of materials. And then when you look at the question in general, we're talking about poverty cycle. And most of it are really expensive at the moment. How do you expect our poor to be able to afford housing solutions that remains to be expensive at this point? I have interesting data to show. Actually, when I was looking, Googling, which is now the way to do research, is that when you look at the materials in our country in the latest census, it says that 45% of our occupied housing uses concrete and stone, an increase of about 15% in year 2000. Those that are made of wood actually dropped from 22% to 18%. 78% of those occupied houses are actually made of galvanized iron and aluminum. And then roofs made of kogon, nipa, and anahaw declined, and then it's a steady decline from 22% to 15%. If you look at the way at the statistics really, is that shows you that you have, if you try to use it as the poverty cycle, the sustainable housing solution will be useless if you don't know where you're located at, especially if your location is really at risk. First, we need to know, we know what happened in the Philippines when we put our people and put location in harm's way, for example, in Cagayan de Oro. Those are relatively middle income earners, and yet they were allowed to be located in an area which is considered risky. So any sustainable housing in general will not be able to sustain even if one is conscious to buy it at a premium if the location, and this is the role of government to provide that information where they should be locating in the first place. And at the same time, the developers, especially the developers, should try to be conscious and be more informed in making sure that the areas you're trying to develop are actually not as risky or less risk. Second is that on the issue, for example, of the statistics that I've shown, maybe this is where the information on the part of government is lacking, because we've been experiencing a lot of typhoons and all these disasters. In the context of climate change, our people are preparing to have their houses more stable, and yet there are other impacts of climate change. For example, increase in temperature. We know that a dark-roofed house would generally be a hotter house than a light-roofed house. So that's why now in November, our commission will have a campaign, what we call a Paint It Light campaign, wherein we'll try to encourage our community to use at least this kind of strategy, which is at the moment still relatively cheap because you use paint. But the challenge is they said that you cannot just paint it on any galvanized iron, especially it's already corroded. So all these challenges that we see, if you are to answer that question, is really down to cost.
Yes, I think the cost issue is an issue which figures, for all our speakers today. Let me bring Kishore into the equation, because, I mean, how do we then marry this question of sustainability not equals to expensive and affordable, which is not equals to cheap? Yeah, so how do we get sustainable, affordable housing, that is going to work for the people who need it? And what's your experience like in Nepal?
Yeah, thank you. First of all of us who work in housing should understand that housing is a process. It is not a product. It is more than a shelter. It is more than infrastructure. It is more than land. Okay? So in order to make the housing sustainable, the process has to be sustainable. Even if you construct a house, a cheaper house, if it is located quite away from your work center or a place of employment, you spend a lot of money in transportation throughout your life. So the location, so there are 6 attributes of housing that we have to consider to make it sustainable. Number 1 is the location of your house. It should be very near to your work center or a place of employment. Second is the land. In the Asian cities, land is getting very, very costly. On one hand, the land should be safe. It should be safe from disaster, like flood and landslide. But it should be developable. It should have infrastructure. Land without infrastructure doesn't mean anything in terms of housing. Then the third thing comes the infrastructure like the access, the water supply, sanitation, and electricity also. That includes significant cost while developing housing. And then comes the physical structure, which most of us think that that is a housing. While constructing a house, you take care of the material, the specifications, the workmanship, and the climate of that area, so that your family grows and you can achieve your social development, you can have a community life through that physical structure. And last but not the least, there is housing finance. I mean, nobody can afford a decent house with his own income. Although it is said that a household can spend maximum of 40%, 30 to 40% to have a decent house. But even that 40% is not adequate to buy a house or to rent it out. So how to make it affordable? So in order to make it affordable, we have different forms of tenureship, like rental housing. We have this mortgage system and several financing schemes that is available in our countries in Asia. So until and unless we consider all these 6 attributes, we cannot think of sustainable housing. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, I'll just say to the other panelists that, please feel free to jump in whenever you feel like it. Yeah, and I can see some of you actually do. So David, over to you. Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The fact that, that we always talk about cheap or making it cheap or not making it cheap and high quality. I think, as it often happens, we try to focus on the individual house itself. And as you said, it's a process, and it's a process by which I think we need to look at it from a bird's eye view and a holistic view, meaning that maybe the individual units may have a cost that is high per unit, but the thing is, if you assemble those units in a way that's intelligent, interesting, and you make proper use of land or technology, the combination of all of that actually may end in the result that, that particular system actually is more efficient and therefore renders better energy efficiency, it leads to cost savings, and you have better water management, etc., etc. No? And talking about sustainability, I think it's very interesting, always to go back to where we started. And I think where we started as human beings is nature. And I like to draw a parallel. For example, there is a concept called industrial symbiosis or industrial ecology. And industrial symbiosis and ecology actually borrows from the idea of ecosystems. And if you think about ecosystems, it's very interesting because ecosystems has to do with generating, let's say, energy, and then, ecosystems then use that energy, and then the waste are recuperated. So it's a very, well-equilibrated cycle in an ecosystem. And industrial ecology actually borrows from that concept, means that, if we were to think about adopting that same concept in housing, it would be very interesting because you would start saying, okay, well, where do I need to situate houses that could make use of resources, be it away from another industry, to construct something, to build something, to wait, and then whatever that particular unit of housing is generating could also benefit the industries and business around and surrounding them. So I think that, it is borrowing from nature and going back to the basics. Going back to nature is a very interesting concept that maybe we need to elaborate further and understand how to build a symbiosis between the housing unit and the surroundings, and that will lead us to be able to understand where really we need to collocate building units and housing units.
Yeah, I think agencies and companies like yourself understand the relationship, right, between the house and the environment, etc. But I think what is crucial, or perhaps what is lacking, is the fact that the powers that be or the policymakers don't quite understand, or they haven't quite cottoned on. I mean, is that your experience and your experience, Richard? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with everything that's been said, because when we look at, so you have to define sustainability. I mean, what does sustainability mean to every individual in this room? We've all probably got a different idea of what it does mean. For us, our whole sustainability agenda is based on people, planet, and profit. Now, in the private sector, if we're not making a profit, there's no sustainability. You know, we're not going to be there to be able to do stuff like this. So if you can address the people issues, you improve our impact on the environment, and you can make a profit, that's a fantastic model for a company like us. I think we're at the cusp of possibly really understanding what a private-public-people partnership is all about. And I think it's taken us a long time and a lot of trials to get to this place, because we have to understand where the government's coming from, or the local government. We have to understand the business models behind NGOs. We really have to understand what people want, and I totally agree. I would love it if we could come up with one housing solution that you could just push across the world. It's not going to happen. We have to adopt so many different models to address the local cultures, the local needs, the wants, the desires, different size houses, different materials that need to be used. And if you're prepared to do that and work in partnership and extend that partnership out to our customers, other NGOs, bringing more and more people together, we'll finally get to a solution. I've no doubt about that. But it takes time. It takes time to get there.
Let me bring Aristotle into the conversation, because obviously, you run CARD MRI, and that started as an NGO. It's now a full bank via the microfinance route. So what was the response from yourself, and how has it been so far?
Well, first, I'd like you to understand, CARD is dealing with the landless rural workers in this country, meaning they don't have land, they don't have house. Today, our clients have their own house, they have their own land. I think one of the basic fundamental problem here, as we have been approached several times, both by government and a number of NGOs who is involved in housing, their repayment rate is not so good because they start giving loans for housing. I think that's not the model that I'm trying to advocate. What I've been saying long time ago until now, you start with income-generating projects. You're talking about the poor. You need to understand who the poor are, their psychology. When you deal with the poor, you start with the economics. This is the basic. Unless you give the income-generating fundamentals to them, you'll never go around, or you will never succeed in this housing loan. Today, we have 2.3 million, and 50% of our clients have already access to further housing improvement and housing and land costs, loans for us. And they have improved. And the way we start giving them loans is that first to 3 cycles, first 3 years, it's only income generating project. Once they successfully have that income, then we give them the housing loan. The housing loan start with 5,000 to 20,000 pesos. Start with a core shelter. You have a bedroom, you have a toilet, and then you have a kitchen at the back. The next cycle, they want to improve. They get another 5,000, 10,000, and build another room. So this is how it starts. This is how it begins, and this is how this becomes sustainable. Unless we look at these basic income-generating projects, I don't think you'll never be able to make it. Plus, Leon, my problem also as a practitioner, and this is my concern, based from experience in 30 years of working here, the problem with our programs, both government and private, is that they give loans to you 25 years, 5 years or 10 years, and the moment you repay the loan, you get penalized when you advance payment. When you're dealing with the poor, when there is money, they want to pay right away, even though their loans is 5 years. At 6 months, they want to pay. And we give them incentive because they're cashing in right away. But here, most of the program, when they're about to pay you in advance, they're penalized.
Right, got it. Yeah, so is this a template? Is this a model that is adopted across the Philippines, or is this unique just to CARD MRI that, before you can even make them a loan, I mean, it makes total sense that you got to give them something which is income generating, right? So that they can then repay the loan. Lucille.
Before I could react to that, I think we need to level off on what we understood about sustainability. We're talking about sustainability and the ability of our poor to pay, and sustainable housing solutions of the housing structure itself. That's why I was talking about cost, and that this has to be made available to the poor because it's still perceived to be expensive at the moment. If we really look at this, and the statistics I've showed, we know we can be able to bring down the cost if there's volume. And if there's volume, then it could probably trigger more new financial products that could help the poor access this more. Because we need to break that cycle, because there seems to be a perception of a poverty trap in the country, and in the inability of our poor to be able to be part of that financial system, because they're still very much into the informal system. Example, in our country, and I have to be specific, I don't know if there are professionals here in the room, we're talking about architects and engineers. They can't even get together and agree on what kind of standards do we have to push, because us in government, as policymaker, we would like this to be a bottom-up approach and make us understand. And I experienced that when I did a lot of dialogues with these professionals. Then, because the reason why, and I feel that there's a need for us to have a standard, so that government now can help on the science side, because our insurance penetration in the country is relatively one of the weakest in Asia. We wanted to look at risk transfer mechanism other than microfinance, because I used to be a microfinance practitioner before joining government, is that when we were in microfinance, yes, it's a poverty alleviation tool, but we were only lending on those poverty line and above poverty line. I don't know about card, but that's what I noticed in some of the microfinance, special banking institutions and rural banks specifically. So if you look at this, what are the risk transfer mechanism? If your house, for example, is built a little bit stronger than the usual house that we're used to, is this now can be available for a risk transfer mechanism as an incentive rather than as an expense? Because the more we create microfinance or other financial products to be made available to the poor, then we will trigger probably more supply, and then more demand, and then we have more supply. And it's really all about economics. Lending to the poor makes business sense. There are a lot of good economic models out there. But you are right in saying that we cannot have the same kind of product that we're lending to a much higher sector than we are lending to this poor.
Which comes back to the question and definition of affordability. When you say affordable, I mean, what are you trying? I mean, who are you trying to make this affordable for? Is it for the poor and those just above the poverty line, or is it making it affordable for a spectrum of people in the lower income brackets? What is your experience in Nepal? That's one thing. And I mean, do you also practice microfinance there in terms of, sort of trying to enable some of the lower income classes to make an income first before you're making out loans to them, or are you giving direct loans from the government of Nepal?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, we should understand who the poor are. When you talk about the urban population, the poor people, they live in the squatter settlements, in the slums. As you know, in the metropolitan cities of Asia, almost 1/3 of the population is living in slums and squatter settlements. My country, as the urbanization is going up, the squatter population is rising every year. So these people, they do not have the tenureship of land. They are squatting on either private land or public land. So since they do not have the land ownership certificate, they cannot get the citizenship certificate as per the policy of my country. Okay? They cannot get loan from the bank or any financial institution. They cannot put their land or their makeshift house as a collateral in the bank. So that is the reason why we engage the community, particularly the women in these squatter settlements, to organize themselves, to make some saving out of their husband's income, out of the education and health of their children. And these savings are collected by the women leaders, women committee, and they lend it to their members for some income generating activities, and that income will multiply in course of time so that they can add a one room or they can improve their roofing, even in this quarter settlement or in the slum areas. So there is a network of thousands of these microfinancing, these schemes and the saving credit groups throughout the country, but these are mostly handled by women. And as you know, women are very good in saving. They save a lot. Okay? So we have utilized the power of the women for these saving credit groups. Thank you.
So, Lucille, you're giggling. Yeah, there's a lot of research which shows that the women are very responsible in terms of the payback rates. I mean, are the payback rates pretty high in Nepal? I mean, I think, Ari, you were saying that the payback rates from your clients are pretty successful, pretty significant.
Yeah, our repayment rate is near perfect. It's about 99.35% over the past 27 years. These are because of the women. Don't I hear a clap from the women?
A big round of applause to the women in the world.
And we have been tested for the past 27 years. As I've said, 50%, Secretary Siring, I'm happy to tell you that we're dealing with the landless rural workers. When you deal with the landless, you know what I mean. These are the poor. So I guess we're one of the few exceptions that they're mentioning about the microfinance institution that only deals with the Ds and the C. We're dealing with the E's. No? These are the lowest, the poorest among the poor. But let me tell you also, with reference to insurance, the penetration rate here in this country, in terms of insurance, whether it's life, non-life, is below 5% of our total GDP. This is very low and the lowest in Southeast Asia. But because of this experience as a practitioner, today, CARD has created, established another microinsurance company. And we're doing, because of this climate change, Philippines is visited by around 21 typhoons every year. This has changed. It's now 23, it used to be 19. And because of this, because of the experience, drawing from our sessions with our clients, we came up with our own disaster housing insurance. The difference is that our clients can now avail disaster housing insurance when there's typhoon, when there's earthquake, when there's fire, when there's flood, and their houses are affected. We pay the clients because their houses are insured. The difference among our insurance way of doing things is that we're known as the 135 institution. As a 135 institution, after the typhoon, we pay within the day. If there are questions, in 3 days. And if there are still questions, in 5 days with finality, we'll pay the clients or we will not. Commercial insurance companies, sad to say, while we have very low insurance penetration, I'm not saying most of them, a number of them in the commercial insurance sector is also doing 135. They pay you after 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, or you never get paid. This is the reason why you don't, or we're not able to push the housing insurance here. But today, with our company, the Mutual Benefit Association and our CAMYA has come up with this housing insurance. And we pay. And this helps governments because they don't have to go to the evacuation center. I used to be an undersecretary of DSWD. I used to go to Mindanao. There's problem. And every day, we have to feed them in the evacuation center, thousands of them. But because we have this insurance, this saves a lot of cost for the government. So I think the way to look at it, from the economic point of view, you may talk about ecology, environment, technology, but you have to be very practical when you deal with the poor. Deal with their economics. They're very clever. After they have this income, they know what to do. They will construct a house cemented. They will not construct houses that are inferior because this is their life. This is their future.
So, I mean, if your organization is so successful, I mean, is the Philippines government actually taking their cue from you? I mean, how can the government actually help you to further your work? I mean, you mentioned some challenges earlier?
Yeah, in fact, we have worked with government, and we're still working with the government, and I will never get tired of working with government. We were the first pilot project with DBP and ADB. We first got the first 50 million for housing microfinance, pushed by my friend Ed Jimenez. And we liked that program very much. And the program worked so well. And because we have set up the arrangement and condition, ADB, DBP, we're dealing with the poor. Once they're able to pay, let's allow them to pay. But when we were about to get the next 100 million, the rules of the games have been changed. They're asking for collateral, they're asking for, because auditors are asking for this and that, documentation requirement. I said, we cannot do, because transaction costs. I cannot go to our clients and ask for collateral, because this is an additional cost. So if we have to change our ways, I think we have to work on these regulatory issues. It has to be simplified.
Lucille, is the government being too supervisory? Are they being too controlling when it comes to scrutiny of documents and collaterals? And as Kishore was saying, looking at what they're eligible for by way of microfinance loans and other financial products.
I think one of the working question here was how is policy becoming a barrier? There are delivery of microfinance that are best probably done by civil society and NGO, because banks, even if you're a rural bank, you're still regulated by our central bank. And the stringent regulation is also, in a way, either a barrier or actually a push for more. We know that they're very effective and successful, but they need to be replicated all around the country if we are to be able to cater to the most, because there are just some segment of our community that can be catered either by the rural bank or the thrift bank, the savings bank, or the commercial bank. That's just how we are structured. And I think that that model has been effective, that the Philippines remains to be, we're able to weather all this financial crisis after the 1997. But overall, really, let me just go back again to the sustainable housing solutions. We know, in fact, the Philippines is probably second to India in terms of efficiency of delivery of microfinance. We are very effective in terms of using this methodology, and we've seen that. But how about that delivery translating really of poverty alleviation, when we see that our statistics still shows that our poor remains to be of the same number, probably increasing? Now we'll go back to sustainable housing solution, especially in the context of environment, and we should not lose our discussion on that. What are the sources of materials you're actually selling to your poor? Because I know, and this might be a controversial statement to say, we are now almost 92 million people in 2010, with a 1.9 annual average increase. Population puts pressure on natural resources. We need to be able to manage the way we're trying to manage our population and the need for more housing. And where do we source out these materials? If we do a microfinance and microinsurance, for example, what kind of materials you're actually offering to them? Because if that's a bulk of your population, then the volume is high, then there's really an opportunity to try to change the mindset. We're still very much dependent on wood, even if most of our houses are no longer, are decreasing. Galvanized iron are still made of copper. There's a lot of opposition on mining in that sense, and yet those who oppose are probably living under materials that are sourced from mining. So this is where the challenge, I guess, of all of us here is, how do we really make sustainable housing affordable, and yet we protect the environment, not protect, but make it sustainable, so that we prepare our community for the challenges of climate change.
Yeah, let me bring in now our two private sector individuals from CMX and Bears Materials Science. I mean, beyond the wood, beyond some of the materials which are typically used. I mean, what are you trying to do here?
I think there's a number of things we're trying to do. I mean, one is, as I say, it's to give the benefits of the technology as being developed today and will continue to be developed in the future, which is beneficial to society, but bring it as far down the pyramid as you possibly can. And that's the secret. And for us, if I give you another example, flexibility has got to be the answer here. And you know, a rigid government or a rigid policy or anything rigid is not going to work. You know, at the end of the day, the government is not the customer. The customer is the person who's going to use the house. And if we're not listening to that, if we're not understanding what the needs and the wants are, everything else is really important. The economic model, there has to be economic benefit in the neighborhood or wherever you're putting your low-cost housing solutions, but really understanding what is the need of that individual, what is the need of that person. Is it 10 square meters? Is it 20 square meters? Is it brick construction? Is it wood? Is it something else? All of these have to be understood. I can go along, for example, I'll just give it from my perspective, I can go along to Mercedes and say, we have a fantastic new seating solution for your new E-Class. And they go, that's great. Does it do this? And we go, no, but BMW didn't want that. Oh, well, we do. If we're not flexible enough, you know, to be able to work with the specific requirements of these customers, we're not going to be in business. And that flexibility that we have to show in the private sector has to drive down through all our partners and everybody concerned.
Yeah, I guess I was interested, Richard, also. I mean, you've got, you mentioned that you signed off on a housing project in Zamboanga yesterday. What sort of materials are you using? Why is that more affordable and more sustainable than what's presently being tapped?
Okay, is it more affordable? It's not more affordable. But what it is, we're bringing the modern materials, and we're using polyurethane here, which is an insulation material which has the best insulant properties available. What you're actually doing by using polyurethane as an insulant is you're reducing the energy cost of cooling or heating, whatever it is, wherever you happen to be, whether you need hot or cold. But you're reducing that substantially, and you're giving the life of the building a much lower cost over 30 years. I mean, if you just stick up a bamboo frame, yes, you're giving shelter. If you're putting something in place that has a lifetime of 30 to 50 years, is reducing energy consumption, is giving a nice ambient feeling into, excuse me, to a family, you're completely changing the social aspect of what that family comes up with. If you do that at a price that is competitive to what is on offer in the market, then you're getting the advantage of modern technology. And to be honest, you know, we signed a memorandum of understanding with Habitat for Humanity yesterday morning, or sorry, the day before. And you know, I am absolutely convinced that we spent a year talking with Habitat, really understanding where Habitat is coming from, them understanding where we're coming from, and we believe that we will be really putting into place models, not just here in the Philippines, but right across Asia in terms of you know, how we improve the housing for the poorest people in society.
Yeah, quickly, before I get to Kishore, David, so how is CEMEX actually weighing in as well in this respect?
So it's very interesting. I mean, I think that, you know, what is always very important to keep in mind is that, you know, to achieve really the benefits of materials and how materials are really going to be used efficiently in the context, I think it's always very important to understand that, you know, it's not any one single material that's going to do it, yeah? Just to give you a very simple example, I mean, if you're going to build a house with windows, you know, you can have the house with the best insulating material, but if that window allows leakage of heat or any, it's going to be a problem, right? So I think that, you know, I think industries working together in the private sector to offer interesting solutions is key. Meaning that, you know, we cannot be naive in believing that one single material will solve every problem. Okay, I think that's very important. But I think also the other key element in what I always believe is that it's not so much, you know, the sophistication or what kind of material, but I think it's also very important is to make it very accessible technologically speaking. Meaning that we have to create an industrializable process, meaning that it has to be easy to produce and easy to manufacture. And I give an example. In CEMEX, we have a program called Assisted Self-Help Building Program, where we actually enable the workers to gain income by actually manufacturing themselves the concrete blocks or the cement-based blocks themselves. So they actually earn money in manufacturing those blocks that actually will go into building their houses. But actually 50% of those blocks are actually sold to the private sectors that are involved in actually investing in that housing project. Yeah. So, you know, this goes back again to what was said before, is that, somehow you need to be able to generate the ability to those people to be able to create self-dignity, and that they know that they're working and earning money in a way that also helps them and helps themselves. And helps others as well. So I think that's a key point. And what I just want to touch on one last point, which is very important, is that often we don't stop, and I think you brought a very good point. We don't stop to ask what is really needed. Yeah. And the thing is, more than also stopping and asking what is needed, is also the methodology that we do to understand what is needed. Because sometimes a direct question will get you maybe an answer, but you probably don't really know what exactly is needed unless you do behavioral observations. And I think that is also very important.
So when you say we don't stop, you mean everyone, government policymakers, public sector, the whole spectrum of, okay.
Yeah.
Kishore, you're dying to jump in, yes?
Comments on Richard's statement. In developing countries, we are in search of a technology which will enable us to produce housing in mass over a certain period of time. And in the context of climate change, we are looking for a technology that consumes less water. In the last decade, in our housing projects, we never considered water as a building material, never. We thought that it comes free of cost. But nowadays, even in South Asia, water is becoming so scarce that we include the cost of water in the estimate of the house. But water is getting scarce, okay? So we are looking for that technology, and from the private sector, you can do research in this aspect. That will be a blessing for the millions of people in South Asia. Thank you.
Yeah, you're talking about housing for the masses, and I want to go back to what Lucille was saying earlier, that, we need the volume, basically, for the housing to be more affordable. How does one get the volume? Is it a matter of joining all the dots? Because if organizations are working individually in terms of providing housing solutions for various groups of people, how does one then coalesce all these needs and then make that affordable? It will really mean sort of pulling together, the whole spectrum, the whole ecosystem of NGOs and policymakers and architects and contractors and, people like Cemex and Bayers, etc. Right? That's a tough call.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, it's really knowing your market primarily. When we talk about technology, there are two things of producing it. If we talk about trying to engage the private sector, they invest in R&D and the intellectual property cost, then somehow when they produce it, they have a patent, and somehow it increases the cost. This is where government would like to understand when should it intervene in trying to invest its own R&D so that you don't create an intellectual property, you lessen the cost and make it more available in mass. But at the same time, who would want to produce a government R&D and not earn from it, and it becomes mass, and yet it would allow a lot of people to have access to it? It's a difficult. How do you do
So
this
chicken
government
and egg,
R&D,
yeah, who
or
wades
should
in
private
first?
sector
Yes.
invest in it? So I guess where the market is, so that you know where to intervene, where government cannot also try to disrupt the market and allow the market to do and spend a little bit more on it. At the same time, allow them to be sustainable in engaging and try to be doing the responsible thing. So as much as possible, government should never tinker on what the market would be doing. But at one point, if this has to be really important, then maybe a government policy might be needed. At the same time, we know that if we're just wanting to allow our people to be able to afford it, then maybe the market, the private sector should also contribute. And we know there are certain trade-offs in all these things. You mentioned about polyurethane, which on the other hand is an ozone-depleting substance. Plastic, but it reduces energy, for example. So it reduces your energy costs. At the same time, it could have some other adverse aspect. So at the same time, we need to be able to understand these trade-offs. You cannot totally just go back to the boondocks and say, we're not doing this anymore. So we need to be understand, and government to be very careful not to come up with policy that will hurt the market than actually help enable it.
Yeah, do you all agree? I mean, first of all, that, you know, there are lots of issues here, and we're still coming back to dealing with all these issues. The government should not be rowing the boat on its own. It should just be steering. If it does regulate, how should it regulate? How, in the meantime, does the private sector actually wade in? I mean, if it's really a free market system in a certain sort of, is it really free market because it's also slightly managed free market? Over to you guys, and maybe we can throw that open to the floor in a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, since we're thinking a little bit out of the box, I mean, I just want to share a video that actually I saw some time ago. It's actually by Cameron Sinclair, and he talks about a call for open source architecture, and I found it very fascinating because what he started was what he did was take advantage of today's world. Yeah? Today's world is, you know, who doesn't have a Facebook account or a Twitter account? I mean, who's not involved in social media? I am not, by the way, but anyways, I'm the exception. But what is interesting is that, you know, he launched a blog where he just said, okay, I need to find a way to build, you know, housing units for a calamity that just took place. I think it was Hurricane Katrina, and he found out that very rapidly 500 architects or more worldwide started to give their inputs on what to do and what to design and what to build. And, you know, it brought all these architects together in an open source environment, right? Because we talked about, you know, intellectual property, protecting know-how, and all those things being barriers. But today, I think, you know, what we always forget is that human are the greatest resources that we have. I mean, human creativity and human willingness to help each other is a great resource, and that we don't tap into often. And I think, I mean, it sounds romantic, but I think it's something that works. And I mean, if you actually go to see his video in TED Talks on open source architecture, you will see that it's a process by which, you know, you get architects from all over the world, you know, giving their inputs on how to design sustainable solutions for housing. But not only that, but it's a process by which it involves the people directly. I've seen projects that he has proposed and shown that where people themselves are involved directly in the process of designing the houses, building the houses, and so forth. So I think it goes back again to, you know, putting human dignity into the process and tapping into something that is very normal, very unthought of often in many cases, is that the human drive and the humanness of humans is a reality in many senses, and we forget that. Yeah. So I mean, we talk a lot about regulations and things that, I mean, which are important to put some order and structure. But I think there is some degree of flexibility that you talked about that is very key as well. You know, there should be some flexibility to open and break the status quo.
Okay, I think we'll throw the session open to the floor if we're happy here, and then we can continue discussing it as well. So yeah, our panelists are open to taking questions. If there are any questions from the floor. Yes. Okay. Yeah, do you mind walking up to the mics and also identifying yourself, and also to hopefully keep your questions quite concise? Thank you.
I am Agarwal from India, and my question relates to Indian rural conditions. As all we know, in India, a large number of rural people don't have the house. But among those who have the house, as per government data, out of the 3 essential ingredients requirement, that is water, electricity, and sanitation, only 18% have all these 3%, all these 3 facilities. Rest, about 25% don't have any of these facilities, and rest have either 1 or maybe 2. In such conditions, how to address this issue? What are your opinion? Thank you.
Yeah, who would you like to address this question to? I'm sorry. To all 5 of the panelists, who would like to pick up on this, that only 18%, I think, of the population, if I got your question right, in India has access to water, electricity?
Only 18% out of all the 3?
Yes.
30% have none, either 1 or 2.
Yeah, 30% have none, and the rest either or. Yes, Kishore.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
In rural areas.
That is the typical scenario in South Asia. If I take the example of my country, Nepal, our country is almost 85% rural population that do not have access to the national grid electricity or any kind of sewerage system. What we have done, we have tried to do is on-site sanitation, very cheap on-site sanitation. We have developed technology. And in the hilltop communities where you cannot take the piped water, there is no source of water, we are doing rainwater harvesting. Okay? We have developed that technology. And solar power. So these are on-site services which the household can get access of. And there is a system of providing some contribution, some cash contribution, some subsidy on the part of the government also in providing this on-site sanitation. But in the urban areas, still people, they get access to these city services. Thank you.
Okay. Lucille, yeah, you wanted to respond.
Probably, we are in the commission, we're now doing some pilot areas based on climate change rainfall scenario. We know we probably have the same statistics. Of course, there's more people in India. But yes, we also have a lot of our rural areas don't have access to safe drinking water. So now, because of this pilot project, we did vulnerability assessment. Most of our plans, especially in disaster, are still based on historical events, and most of it is water-related. It's becoming to be a disaster if despite what science is telling us, we're not doing anything about it, it becomes a disaster. So what we're trying to do here is look at opportunities of climate. We now have a climate change scenario by 2020 and 2050. So when we did our assessment of vulnerability, we saw that yes, there will be areas that will be risky, but at the same time, there are areas that will be experiencing more water. What kind of technology that will be made available to the poor? We realize that there are a lot of areas already that are doing rainwater harvesting. So, and in fact, it's not only being able to have water when water is needed, but it is also considered a flood control mechanism. And we wanted to, and then because of that, because of improving the capacity of our local government to understand their vulnerabilities, they themselves passed resolution and ordinances at the local level to make it mandatory in their community, at least in the context of water. In terms of housing and heat, because there are other impacts of climate change like increase in temperature, they've realized that our Bahay Kubo, which is our indigenous house, has always been a sustainable housing structure. And because we've been so modernized and westernized that, especially in Batanes, in our area, up in Batanes, we've been prone to typhoon. So now they realize they have to go back to what they were used to, houses on stilts with a little bit more modernized design, using nipa kogon and covering it with nets, and the air to allow more ventilation. And they've realized that, okay,
the solution
is actually there in the first place. So what we wanted to give them really is the support on the technical side and make them innovate it a little bit more, but not completely abandoning of the reason why they've been surviving on this in the first place. So I don't know if we're able to share it, but maybe the solution actually in rural areas in India is probably just in their hands.
Harry, you want to respond? Yeah, and does anyone have a next question coming up? Yeah, can you go to the mics? Yes.
Just a response to this now for microfinance, the institution that I work with. We're now becoming one of the biggest distributor of solar power. So this alternative solar energy. So we're selling and we're giving loans, solar lamp, solar power. I think one of the examples here is Mindoro. We are the one who really pushed that program in Mindoro for the solar. Yeah.
Excellent. The gentleman over there, has a question. Yes.
I'd like to address these questions to Dr. Alip. I'm June Salvador, Habitat Philippines. Sir, you are doing tremendous work. Thank you for sharing with us all your accomplishments. Now, I heard you say that you're working and would love to work with government. Can you share with us what are those measures that you have suggested to the government which have been adopted, and the most serious suggestion which have not been adopted by government, and why? Thank you, sir.
I don't want to put the position here, the government.
What have they not adopted?
Well, we had a very successful pilot project with them, with the housing microfinance loan program with DBP. And because of the experience, we have advanced our work with them. We're now looking at policies, regulation, within which we can remove all these regulatory requirements with reference to collateral, the payment system. In fact, a year ago, we almost signed an agreement with one of the government regulatory agency in mortgage. But I think they're still reviewing it with the legal mandate and things like that. We hope to pursue that at a later time within this year.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this gentleman in front. Yes.
I would like to pay compliments to the moderator. Right at the beginning, he raised a very fundamental question, what the sustainability is. You see, now the sustainable community, resilient communities are newly emerging buzzwords in the housing sector. But I think what I personally feel is that the issue starts from the land tenure, security of the land tenure. Because unless and until people know that they can live longer, this is the life, how can, if they are not really sure of the land, sustainability really doesn't emerge. Because they need to be very much sure that they have to be living here longer. Now, how the land emerges in this whole process is by two ways. One, the people squatter on lands. Or second is that the people who are the land mafias, they sell the land, unregistered sales which are out of the system. Now the governments and the municipal authorities, when we are talking of self-sustained communities, empowering communities, we have to give them water, we have to give them sewerage, and we have to give them electricity. Now most of these cases, the municipal authorities avoid giving them because then these water bills, electricity bills, they become sort of pseudo titles. And in all these communities and slums, we might be aware that the property is bought and sold not on a valid title, but the people say, on this property I received the electricity bill, I received the water bill, and based on that, in my name, that becomes sort of a pseudo title which is outside the system. So I think we've got to address this issue primarily from the land.
Okay, let's put that to the panel, because maybe we didn't touch on the issue of land and how land costs actually factors into sustainable housing. Yes, Aaron, you want to go first?
This is what I'm saying. This is the reason why you need to start with income-generating activities. When you have income-generating activities, what does it mean? It means cash. When you have cash, you have income, you can buy education, you can buy housing, you can buy house.
So when you make up, sorry, let me interrupt. When you make these loans out to your clients, are you making them loans which also include price of land, which their houses are being built on?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the model that we are trying to advocate. When you start with this microfinance loan, they start with income generating projects, and once they have income, then they can set aside them to build asset. So first they start to rent the land or lease the land. After a while, when they have more income, then they will begin to buy the rights, and then they will begin to buy the title, and then after that, then you can begin to give them housing loan. We can also mix buying of the land, but you start first with the income-generating projects.
You make it sound really simple. Lucille, I mean, what is the challenge as far as land cost is concerned?
Well, if we, in lending to the poor, we also have, when you understand that not all of them are entrepreneurial. So if they cannot generate income, what are the other alternatives to be able for them to be able to afford? So we're now looking at regular salaried individuals. And our problem, especially in rural areas, is that there are job skills mismatch and there is not really a lot of jobs available in the rural area, so there's now a rural to urban migration. So what we wanted to see is there are a lot of government lots out there. There's a free patent that we're giving out, a restriction of 5 years before you can sell it. But at the same time, initially, there was also a restriction that you cannot use your free patent as a collateral to the bank. So we're trying to take out that restriction so that what government has given to the poor can also be used as a physical asset for them to be a collateral to banks. There are a lot of issues, yes, because at the end of the day, there's still about being able to recover some yield. And it's not going to be a dole altogether. And if you are to look at all of this and summarize it, it's really about capacity and education.
Okay, Kishore, what is your government actually doing? And if I can be, well, I wouldn't even call it slightly provocative, but why can't governments be giving land to the poor? I mean, isn't there enough land in Nepal, in the Philippines, in India? And why can't you just parcel it out?
Actually, not all the governments in Asia have got enough land, you know. In most of the countries, land belongs to the people, private land. And the government land is covered with either forest or there are national parks or other government establishment. Those land cannot be spared for housing. So the land available for housing is only either the private land or unutilized land. Now, when you talk about providing land to the squatters or slum dwellers, my experience is that the household, they want the permanent land ownership, which the government cannot do. Because if you provide permanent land ownership, we are reproducing the squatters. Even myself, I can claim for the land title. The middle income group, even the higher income group, they will go influence the government to get that land title. So what we are talking about is the collective land ownership. It's not the individual land ownership, but the collective one. If somebody wants to sell the land, he or she can sell, but they will sell to the community, not to the next person. That is how we can address this land issue. Thank you.
So there are lots of equity issues. Do we have a last question?
Yes.
We probably need to wrap quite quickly. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Foremost, thank you very much for a very interesting, inspiring, and informative discussion. I am Sunny Dukay. I work with the Organization of Socialized Housing Developers of the Philippines. And on the area of sustainable, affordable, and accessible housing, I'd like to put forward that there exists a lot of technologies using indigenous materials and materials that abound the country. Maybe this is also true in other countries, Asian countries. However, the hurdle, and there are efforts also of the private sector. For instance, I know that CEMEX has been implementing affordable and sustainable projects in some areas of the country, like in Cebu. However, the hurdle really is, sorry about that, the hurdle really is, one, for the people to be informed that the merit of utilizing new technologies and new construction materials vis-a-vis the traditional standards. We have to inform them. Second is for the government to accredit in the rules and regulations with respect to the standards. If the government does not input these non-traditional materials in their standards, then developers and house builders will not be able to utilize this also. And third, very important, is that the financial institutions and the banking industry should be able to incorporate this in the mortgageability and the acceptability of utilizing indigenous materials. So if these hurdles will be done, I believe that housing can be made more affordable and accessible for everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think he quite summed up our whole chat for us. I mean, basically use of materials, the affordability issue, back to the financing, and also government's role. I want to thank all my speakers. I think I want to go down the line and maybe just tap all of you for a quick last word as to what you want to see really quickly. We've got maybe 2 minutes. In terms of what you want to see, where you're at this point, and you know what you're hoping for in terms of wish for your sector or your organization, etc. Ari, let's start with you.
Well, I'd like to reinforce what the last person who made this question. But I'd like to add, there are two additional things I'd like to add.
Okay,
How we
there's
can
more.
push this, to move this housing program. The other thing I'd like to expound on is after-sale service. When you're dealing with the poor, where do we go to? There's a problem of technology. Where do we go to? Who addresses those concerns? You're too far. Second, you need an alternative distribution channel. We know that the present distribution channel may not carry this technology because this is a departure from the traditional of business because these are commercial ventures. So I think you need to look for alternative distribution channel. If you're dealing with the poor, we're not based in Manila. We're not based in Davao City, in Cebu, in the key cities, in the key urban areas. We're based in the countryside. So where do we get these materials? Where do we get this technology? And if we buy it from Manila, that's way out of our league. That's cost. That is not affordable. And I think you need to leverage with institutions like us, who has the network, who has the outreach. We have 1,500 branches all over the country. I will establish the last branch in Batanes after the typhoon. And then we have about 8,000 full-time staff that can really carry this program. But the address on after-sale service and also the distribution channel.
Yeah, that's another challenge altogether after the house is built. David, quick last word from you.
Yeah, no, I'm very convinced, that there's a strong collaboration network and coordination between the different sectors is very key. I mean, there has to be a willingness of everyone to make things happen. And I think the other most important thing is that we need to understand that, by solving the housing problem for the poor, I mean, we solve also a lot of other problems in society. So I think that, I think all the sectors have to come together to work and find, really, and make things accessible. I mean, accessible in terms of, many different points of view, logistics, from technology, from even, selecting the right type of land use. I always like to go back to what I said before. The ecosystems for me are a great example of sustainability. Nature itself is very sustainable. So I think there's a lot to be learned there, and that we need to be able to, create systems and biosystems or systems that really emulate that. And I think like for example, there was mention about the land use. Selection of the land itself should be driven by what resources I have and how can I use those resources in an efficient way to create a system that is cost effective and it's self-sustainable. Yeah, building something somewhere that doesn't have resources in the end doesn't bring any benefit. Yeah.
Thank you. Kishore.
Yeah. What I'm looking for is an adequate house, an affordable house, a safe house, and an eco-friendly house. In the context of the climate change, that a disaster-resilient house, so that a family can grow, so that a family can break their poverty cycle. That is what I am looking for. Thank you.
And are you confident of doing this by your target year? That's 2017?
Yeah.
So providing that for everyone in Nepal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lucille.
With respect to the government of the Philippines, we have already very much looked into climate change as a development challenge. Our budget, especially in the national level, has already responded since the onset of the administration of President Aquino, from a non-mention of climate change in the previous development plan to a mention of climate change in almost all sectors, especially public works. We wanted to provide a science-based tool for all our community to be able to know, because we know that what the information they know is what will help them. We have already finished a geohazard mapping to identify risky areas that will be made available to developers as part of our contribution to be able to let them know also where they can really build. Then second, we need to push and look further on what kind of standards would best fit to really push for a sustainable housing. Not only is it affordable, but it is also of quality. and then maybe really a true information campaign, building the capacity not only of our poor but everybody else. Especially you've mentioned on how there are ways to do efficient way of building, and maybe there are low hanging fruits that we can identify at the moment. So primarily, this is where the government is focusing. We've strengthened our budgeting process to be more climate sensitive, and then hopefully the standards that will follow after this will really trigger more support, not only in the housing sector, but in all sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, last word to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to see this macro problem solved, and it is a macro problem, and there's a huge danger always of driving this macro problem down into micro problems. And actually, we don't need micro problems, we need micro solutions. And if we have micro solutions, we'll tackle the macro problem. And that's what I want to see. And I want to see everybody, you know, I agree totally with my colleague here from Nepal, everybody to have the opportunity to have the house they need. It doesn't matter what it's built of, what the material is, it is the house they want, the house they need, and the house that can spur them and take them out of poverty. I would love the land problem to be solved right across the region. I would love to see an end to urbanization, increased urbanization, and the stimulation of rural economies. There's so much I would like to see, but there are so many problems that we have to tackle, and no one organization or one company or one anything is going to solve those. But by working together, I honestly believe that we can find solution to all these micro problems.
That's a very good summary. So on that note, I'd like to thank all my panelists for joining us today. I think that was a sign to maybe keep quiet or something. I think I'm overrunning. But anyway, thank you so much, all our panelists. Again, Kishore Thapa, Secretary of Urban Development from Nepal. Marianne Lucille Sering from the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. Richard Northcote next to me from Bayer Material Science, Germany. Dr. Jaime Aristotle Alip from CARD MRI, and Dr. David Zampini from CEMEX. Thank you all very much. Whether it's going to be, you know, micro solutions, macro solutions, I hope we all get there at some point and soon. Thank you.